Hello and welcome to my April wrap-up. Can you believe that we're already through April? I have so much work to do, but it's fine. Let me record this video for you because I want to do that instead. Okay, so this month I read 10 books, DNFs 2, and I'm just going to talk about what I thought of those books here. But I've started doing stand-alone reviews, and with that, I'm not going to be as in-depth for those books. And I'm going to do something a little different, because usually I've been saving those for last, but I'm going to do it different now. I'm going to force you to hear my very abridged thoughts on all the books I've done reviews on, and then save the in-depth reviews for last. Of course, there'll be timestamps if you don't give a shit. But that's the new order. We're going to do this now. So let me go through all the books that I've recorded a review for. Let's start with the one that I actually read last month, which is 1984. I forgot to mention that in my video, my wrap-up for March, so I just want to throw that in here. I love this book and the reread, love the audio that I read. You can check out the review I made for that. Next up will be the Text Colon Duology by Alcrady Martin. And this is the first book. I got the second book as an ARC, which is what prompted me to reread the first book before I read the second one. I thought it was a solid series. 4 stars. I had a lot more to say about that, but again, the review. Next up, Stream of Tranquility. One of my favorite books of the year, I think. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I was not expecting that because up to now, Emily St. John Mandel's been a little so-so for me. But I loved it. You can hear my thoughts on why in that review. Another ARC, of course. We're going through a lot of ARCs this month. Next up is not an ARC. It is The Burning God by R.F. Kuang, and I read this for a read-along or buddy read hosted by Erica from Broken Spine. You can see our full thoughts on that on her channel. TLDR is a solid book, really enjoyed it, but anticlimactic and disappointing. So 4 to 5 stars. Okay, next up, speaking of anticlimactic, Seasonal Fears, 4 out of 5 stars. Full review of this should be up by now. I mean, I love the world, I love the book, I'll return to it. But the threat, I did not necessarily believe. The ending was just anticlimactic, in my opinion. A Fatal Thing Happened on the Way to Form. This is one that I actually thoroughly enjoy. This is essentially a history book, but if you're a fan of true crime and ancient Rome, this is for you. This is a book all about murder in ancient Rome. And it's not just like a story of one thing that happened on the way to Form. It's a series of things. It's a full overview of all the way people got killed in Rome. And honestly, it's as interesting as it was well told. Very funny story. Very well told in a funny way. Like, it's very amusing to read. And next up is The Last Day of the Dinosaurs by Riley Black. This is another one that should have a review up by now, and I solidly enjoyed this. This is basically the story of what happened to dinosaurs after the impact, or before, during, and after the impact. This trick here being, she's telling an arc, a fictionalized story. It's not necessarily fiction, but instead of giving you the science, she's woven together a narrative with the science. Again, 4 to 4.5 stars, probably closer to 4.5. And then now let's move on to books I haven't talked about. First up, though, going to be books that I DNF'd. First is The Library. I'm talking about this because I got an ARC of it from NetGalley. DNF'd it at 55%, and I was unsure if I should do that because I didn't hate the book. I just wasn't getting a lot out of it. It's got plenty to say, don't get me wrong. It's a book all about the history of libraries, and it's very academic and it's very detailed. That's part of the reason I was sort of turned off by it. Not that I don't like academic, it's just the details on top of that. It felt like it was very focused on Europa, sorry. I'm thinking Icy Worlds. European libraries. To be clear, it does start with like Library of Alexandria, one of the earliest libraries we know about, and it mentions other libraries. But overall, it felt like it was very fixated on the evolution of libraries within Europe, which is fine. It's a story worth telling, but I feel like they falsely advertise this as a history of libraries when it's really just a history of European libraries. And I wasn't sure if maybe because I wasn't finished the book, maybe because I wasn't grasping all the details that I thought this was the case, but I did a quick search of the ebook that I was sent from NetGalley, and Europe is mentioned hundreds of times. When I search Africa or Asia, those were mentioned less than 10 times, I think, individually. That it seems very clear that they had a very focused idea of what they want to study here, and it's not as if Europe is the only place that had libraries. That, on top of the fact that it just was so academic in a way that I felt like could have been told more effectively, I decided it just wasn't for me. I'm letting myself DNF, and I feel like I'm having a better reading year for it. I can still talk about the book if I DNF it. I saw it on my red list because it's only 55%, but I think I gave it 3 stars. for NetGalley, but obviously on Goodreads I didn't give it a rating because of the fact I haven't finished it. But I think a 3 stars is where it was headed. Next up is The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Marina Garcia. And this is one I got as an arc from Tor and NetGalley a while back when it was first being released. And I feel bad because I should have read the synopsis instead of just looking at the author's name before I requested it. This is a historical fantasy romance. And honestly, I wasn't not enjoying it. I found the narrative particularly interesting and intriguing, in the world building where people have these sort of magical abilities, also intriguing. But the truth was, I was it 45%, 40% into the book, and I just wasn't invested. Like, they might end up together living happily ever after. She might break it off with him. One might kill the other. And while that seems mildly intriguing, honestly, I just don't care. And it's not that, like, part of it might be that I don't love love stories, but I also don't love historical fiction. But ultimately, if I'm not really feeling it, why am I sticking to it? I mean, sometimes there are other reasons besides not feeling a book that I'll stick with it. In this one, I didn't feel like I needed to. I got enough out of it. I don't think I gave this a hard number. It was fine. It wasn't for me. And I feel bad because, like I said, I need to do better about requesting arcs and make sure that if I'm requesting an arc, it's something I really want to read and not just something that appeals to me for a less substantive reason. And that's what was going on here. Which, I mean, and I say that, and I'm a little hesitant to say it's just because it's romance, because I'm also going to be reading Akwaeke Emezi's new book. And I'm really excited for that. And I know very little about it because that's a romance. But knowing Akwaeke Emezi, I expect that to explore themes that resonate with me very strongly. And that's why I think that romance book will work differently than this one or others generally do. Okay, next up is Beloved, which I'm giving between 4 to 4.5 stars, probably leaning towards 4.5. And I don't want to get too deep into this. I did want to do a send-along review for this, so I'm not sure if I will anymore because I got invited by Bree from the Lock Petition to do a live show with her when she talks about this for her, I believe, her Black Classics book club. This was a reread for me that I read originally back in, I want to say, February 2020. At the time, it was very dense and went over my head, so I knew I needed to reread it to really appreciate it. The same was true for the other book that I read by Toni Morrison, which was The Bluest Eye, and the reread really helped me helped me grasp the themes a lot more effectively. This one was a lot harder. It's not only a lot longer than The Bluest Eye, it's just the story is extremely difficult to follow along, in my opinion, the way it jumps around, plus the audiobook, oh dear God, the audiobook. I'm sorry, I adore Toni Morrison, but Jesus, why? It's like every line she says in that book, it's just a whisper, and it's really hard sometimes to get it to follow along. And on top of that, the chapters, she doesn't say next chapter or end of chapter, she just goes on to the next chapter. And the chapters sometimes have obscure jumps in perception. And even if it's up to you to figure that out, at least if I was changing a chapter in the book, I would know we're changing chapters, so I know to start looking for it. And without that, it makes it extremely difficult. I had to basically extract the audio version that I had and break it down into chapters so I could then at least know when I'm getting to the end of a chapter. And it's frustrating that such a hard book is made harder. That's the other thing, is that this book was amazing because it had such strong things to say, such strong themes it was exploring about the history of America and the way it has handled race, slavery, and the way it's affected, I guess, the generational trauma and the effect it's had on family and motherhood. Then it's also a literary masterpiece because of how it's told. And while I can appreciate and really value a book for it doing that, appreciate an author for doing that, part of me can't help but wonder, if you want to get this message across, why are you using such a difficult mechanism to do it? Like, there's a more effective way to get your point across. And that's why I can't give us 5 stars. Just that there were times that I was really frustrated that the book just wasn't more straightforward in the story. I can get it's going to be heavy topics, but heavy topics don't have to be told in a complex manner, if that makes sense. Like, I get the feedback. There's a feedback there of one bolstering the other, but I also think that it has the potential to undermine it. And in my opinion, I think it does undermine it. I think it's hard for some people to appreciate this book because of how it's written, and it frustrates me to no end. Okay, I want to take a moment to add on something to this, because since I've had the conversation, the discussion with Bree, I've got a better appreciation for why Morrison approached it in this way. And while I'm going to try and summarize it here, the best thing to do really is to watch the discussion we had, because it's June now and I'm like a month or more removed from this conversation was not quite as fresh on the mind as it was. But the main issue, I think, with my analysis there was that there is value to be had in the gatekeeping of Black culture, of Black people gatekeeping their own culture, their own history, and putting that sort of barrier in there to separate it, to maintain a area of separation between them and people outside of the culture. And I'm not going to get into why or why not that is appropriate, but the points that Brie made in the discussion we had, on top of another discussion she's had with someone else, another group of people, on gatekeeping Black culture, or just gatekeeping in the Black community, really, I think, touches on why that was probably necessary, or at least why that's why he chose to do that. It's not my place to say it was necessary or if it was a bad choice at all. I realize now that there was more value there, even though I didn't see it, and I probably was a little too quick to assume that I know what's right here, which I never quite felt that I did. It was just my impression, but now I have a better impression. I don't want to leave you with the wrong impression, if that makes sense. So that review was longer than I intended it to be. Now, make sure you check out that live show. This will go probably after the live show, so I'll make sure I link to it after the fact so you can check that out. Next up is Whisper Down the Lane, another arc. I got 3 out of 5 stars. Whisper Down the Lane was a well-told horror book about, what was it about? A satanic panic, and about a teacher who, as a child, was basically coerced into lying about their teacher doing satanic and sexually deviant things to them and their students. Then their adulthood, they're beginning to experience the same thing the teacher did. And I thought it was really well told, and the writing, the tone was perfect for a horror book. It's exactly what I wanted from a satanic panic book in that aspect. But where it failed for me was the true crime aspect. I've never been a big fan of true crime. I know I said if you're a fan of true crime and murder and Rome, you might like the other book. But generally, I'm not a fan of true crime. I like supernatural horror. And I also love a book that's not afraid to, I guess, walk the line of supernatural versus, I guess you could call it true crime. And this book had the potential to do that. And I feel like it undercut itself from the get-go. The synopsis makes it very clear this is a true crime book, not a supernatural horror. And it undermines itself by not walking that line when it could have very effectively done that and added a new level of suspense for the reader. And the fact that it didn't irks me to no end. Like, you could have made this so great, but you made it just okay. If you like true crime, I think there's a good chance this will work for you, especially if you're a fan of horror and true crime, because this is a great mesh of the two. It's not for me. Next up is Dark Stars, an anthology of horror stories edited by John Taff. I wanted to do a standalone review for this, but then I did it and it was about 3 minutes long. So I realized I can't post a review that's like 3 or 4 minutes long. And I didn't want to break down every story, so really all I can say is some general thoughts here. I thought this was a solid collection with very few stories, if any, that I just didn't like. For me, the thing that irked me the most was that this was being advertised as sort of representation of the horror of today. Like it's supposed to be like building on a previous anthology from the 80s that was advertised as, representing the horror of that day. And it's supposed to represent the horror of today. And I will give it some props. It's very diverse in its variety of horror stories and in its type of authors, to be fair. But some of the stories felt at most dark fantasy, if even that. And it felt weird to include them in a horror anthology. And in some ways, I get it. Horror is a variety of things. That's not just what I think it is. But I don't think a book has to be objectively scary to be horror. But I expect to feel some anxiety and dread, something of that nature in the story. If not for myself, at least for the character. I expect to have the character feeling some sort of anxiety to associate with the theme of horror. And there were a couple stories, especially in the beginning, that didn't do that at all. They were perfectly great stories, honestly. I was a little irked that they were in this anthology. But like I said, horror is a variety of things, and so perhaps my definition of a horror instilling some type of level of dread, or at least being able to appreciate that the character has some dread, is perhaps a fault of my own. I don't want to say horror is just this, but I have a strong inkling to say horror should have some level of dread. I should feel there's some dread or something, some anxiety or dread associated with it. It wasn't there. But to be clear, it's still a solid collection. And because of the fact that it is a huge variety of authors, you're not only going to be exposed to all the best horror writers out there today, you're also going to inevitably find something that you love, which I did. There were some great stories in here. You have people like Stephen Graham Jones, Priya Sharma, and another author who I can't remember, but his story was, I tried to search him immediately because I need to read his books. I love a good anthology. It gets me eager to pick up people's other books. Honestly, that was how I found Stephen Graham Jones and Shauna McGuire, was in Ellen Datlow's works in horror anthologies. So I love a good horror anthology that exposes you to some great authors, and this absolutely does that. So if you want a horror anthology, I think, if you like horror and you want anthologies, I think this is a great, quick, fun read to use, even if it's not the most effective horror in my opinion. And that's that. We're at 16 minutes, so it wasn't that short of a video. I read 10 books. How many hours? I don't know. I still feel like I'm reading more than I have in a very long time. I didn't check the page numbers, but I'm reading a good amount, and I like it. Not that I'm reading more, it's just that I feel better, and also just generally mentally, I don't know, healthy is the right word, but I feel happy about my reading habits at the moment, because it means I'm spending less time focusing on things that I don't appreciate as much. So I'm happy for myself, just to maintain the reading habits. Those are all the books that I read in April. I'm having a good May so far. It's only May 2nd when I'm recording this, but Exhalation, not to spoil anything, but it's phenomenal, as I expected. Let me know if you've read any of these books. I should stop talking about May because we're still in April for this review. Let me know if you've read any of these, and if you think you might, especially the ones that I'm a little critical about. I'm curious to see if you might try and check it out. But as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day and stay safe. Goodbye.